So here we are again, sculpting another character, just setting up my reference photo, adding a few spheres. These look like icospheres, and just using proportional editing and trying to set up like a decent base for the character. I think of doing the same thing to use for the body, to connect the head and the bottom part of the body, but I decide against it and go back. Now I'm using the skin modifier, and that's how I end up making the legs and the body. I think of doing that for the feet, but then I switch to these planes right here. I think of doing the same thing for the mouth, but quickly decide against that also. And here I'm just making the crown. And it's basically just like a subdivided box, or box with a subdivision surface modifier. I delete the top and the bottom and add a solidify. So here I'm making the collar for the cape, and I'm using the skin modifier for that too, and just moving some edges around. And then this is the cape, which I just use cylinder and delete some faces. And then I use proportional editing to try to take it apart. And the mirror modifier too. I tend to be a little more comfortable poly modeling just because I've done a lot more of that. So I usually go pretty far poly modeling the base before I start sculpting. I think it ends up saving quite a bit of time. So here I'm getting started on the head, messing around with dynamic topology, and just trying to get the basic head shape. Mostly using like the grab and the snake hook. At this point I still haven't sculpted a whole lot, so I really spend a lot of time just being finicky trying to get the shape right, when really what works better is to work on big shapes first and then start adding smaller details. I think I'm just getting caught up in trying to make it too perfect right here, and I really didn't need to spend that long on it. So here I'm thinking about getting started on the mouth. And same with this, I definitely spend a lot of time laying it out right here, when this probably would have been something that would be a little easier to like use a base mesh for, like I started to in the beginning, but instead I try to sculpt the whole thing, which might have been good practice. You know, it's not necessarily a bad idea, it's just that it took me a long time because it's not something I'm used to doing basically. So here I'm starting to actually get some decent shapes now. I wanted the lips to kind of like come off of the face, going for a pretty exaggerated cartoony style. Just trying to make sure the contours are right. And here I start layering to try to get the crease for the lips right. Shapes like this I found using the regular draw brush is actually pretty good at getting shapes that are a little more like round and bulbous. I don't think I really used it here as much, but I definitely have in sculpts after this. So now here I'm trying to get the eye bags down, and I tend to stick with clay strips for a long time. For a while, that was the brush that I felt most comfortable with. But again, I think for bulbous shapes like this, the draw brush is actually pretty good. And there's the inflate brush, I think it's called. That's pretty good for this too. So I probably would have saved some time if I used like the crease brush and like the draw sharp brush. And here you can see I'm having an easier time using the regular draw brush and getting like decent shapes with it. I'm getting a decent profile for the lips right here. So here's some more fine detail for the eyes. At this point, once again, I'm getting pretty finicky and trying to get all the details perfect. Which I think once you put a little more time and get better at sculpting, I mean, I still at this point haven't sculpted a whole lot, but I've definitely gotten better at achieving like basic shapes and stuff and just getting big shapes out of the way pretty early. So here I'm trying to get some nostrils, and I really keep layering up the sides like that to try to get the edges sharp. And just decide to start over. try a different method. So I'm using clay strips right here and keeping it pretty flat. And I'm starting to actually get a result that I think looks alright. And I just keep building up and then smoothing. And here I start the mustache, but this is something that I decide against. And, you know, eventually down the road I delete it and just start with a different method. You'll see that. So here I'm getting started on the body now. And remeshing everything because they were made as separate parts, so I needed to remesh so I could properly smooth it. Just trying to connect the body to make it look a little more seamless. But in the end, this is something you don't really see a whole lot of because of the cape that is covering everything. Here I'm trying to make the belly button stick out. Again, going for a pretty cartoony look. Once again, this is something that the draw brush would be pretty good for. Now here I'm trying to make the knees also look a little more like bubbly, kind of just like bulbous. I thought it was cartoony. Almost like the way you would see an Adam's apple in somebody's like throat. That's the style I was going for. So here I'm getting started on the feet, and I had to experiment with this quite a bit to make sure that I wasn't sculpting through it and it was affecting the other side, which ended up happening. And at this point I had already started the feet and went back on it and deleted it and started again because I was getting kind of frustrated with the way I was going about it. This is something I think I probably should have made a better base mesh for this. I could have poly modeled a little more, maybe using the skin tool and like a plane, and then remeshing it together and just like kind of smoothing it out. Because I spent pretty long on this, trying to get each of like the toe shapes like just right. It would have been much easier to just get a better base mesh first. And so here I get started on the crown, and for this I'm going for a pretty organic look from the beginning. That was, see, if you look at the drawing that I did, the crown is pretty like smooth. And so I wanted it to look almost like it was kind of like the frog's feet also. And this ended up being pretty fun. I was using the grab and snake hook a lot to pull things around, and I was just naturally getting shapes that I enjoyed, so this was a fun one to work on, this part. And I decided to go for kind of a more webbed look, almost like each of the spires of the crown right here is like a rib with webbing between it. You're good. So here I go back and just erase the mustache and decide to poly model that later. And then I work on the cape for a little while. There probably are better ways to smooth things out than to just go over with the smooth brush like that, but at this point I was still pretty new. You know, even right now I'm still pretty new. If anybody wants to mention a better way of doing that, you can let me know in the comments below. So here I'm just using the snake hook to position the cape a little better. I really like the snake hook tool, but I find it kind of hard to use also. I really spent a lot of time trying to get better at using the snake hook because it can save a lot of time if you use it correctly. So here I'm trying to use the cloth brush, and I was having a little trouble with it. It's one of those brushes that I'm not exactly sure how to use still. It just doesn't feel as intuitive as I want to, so I need to get better at that still. And I added a plane just so I can tell where the cape looks like it's clipping through the floor. And then here I'm solidifying it a little with a solidify modifier. Give it some thickness. It also helps make it look a little more smooth also. Here I'm just actually going into edit mode and using proportional editing to adjust its position in relation to the collar. And then here I'm getting started on the mustache. So I just mirrored a plane using a subdiv right here. I'm just trying to model it and adding the solidify to give it some chunkiness. Experimenting with a few ideas. This is before I settled on just leaving it smooth and using textures to make it actually look like hair. Even though it was like cartoony still, you know, like thick pieces of hair. It's not very realistic, but I thought maybe it was an interesting idea. Here I'm getting started on the beard. Same basic idea where I'm just poly modeling the base. I find for like really smooth, simple shapes, sometimes poly modeling with a subdivision surface modifier can be a little easier, for me anyway. Here I'm making like the links, or I don't know what you would call this, but the little like buttons that are on the cape. And then here I'm just using UV spheres for the eyes, and then I use proportional editing to get that exaggerated eye shape. I like using a UV sphere for the eye, and you can use the poles for where the pupil is. That was my thought behind it. I think I end up not using that particular spot for the pupils, but generally I feel like that's not a bad shape to use. And so then here I just duplicate the buttons that are on the collar, and this is what I'm using for the gem in the crown. And I just changed the bevel settings to make them a little more angular so they look kind of like cut gems. And then here I start getting into texturing a little. I'm basically just running through and setting basic colors and materials for everything before I start getting more detailed. I'm just adding a Voronoi texture to make it look a little more like fabric. A little subsurface scattering too. And here I'm just trying to unwrap it a little better. If you hit Control between clicking, it finds the shortest route between points, so that ends up helping for shapes that are really like topology heavy there. Here I'm working on the crown, just distorting some noise and using that for the bump and also for the color and the roughness also. I'm trying to get kind of like an old gold look. Still has some shine to it, but I wanted it to look kind of damaged. And I think over here I'm just trying to make the cape look a little dirtier also. It doesn't end up looking very dirty in the render though. I was thinking that might be a good idea if the crown looks damaged to make the cape look a little dirtier too, but it wasn't very noticeable or important. I think right here I am just trying to project. I'm just trying to unwrap the facial hair. And I'm just using like a wave texture with some distortion to, and running that through the bump and adding a little color to it to make it look like hair, like thick, kind of like cartoony strands of hair. So then here I'm working on the eye a little more, and I just unwrap it in a pretty normal, basic way, and just start painting on it, just drawing. So here I'm working on like the eye color, and I end up using a spherical gradient and putting it right in the middle so that the corners of the eyes are a little different color. I'm also using that as a mask with a Voronoi texture. And I chose distance to edge for this one to try to get some veins in the eyes. Once again, it might not be the most noticeable thing in the final render. I tend to get kind of lost in the node editor and just experiment for a long time. I have fun with it, but it is a way to kind of lose track of time too. So here I'm working on the skin, and with vertex colors, there's an option in the vertex paint window where you can dirty vertex colors and it kind of makes a dirty mask for you. It's kind of like ambient occlusion where it finds all the crevices. And I found this is a decent way of getting some good texture really fast. As you can see, like the wrinkles under the eyes and things like that are kind of more pronounced now. And then I'm just throwing a little noise in there too to try to break up that texture that you can see on the stomach. When you use dirty vertex colors or vertex colors at all, the resolution is based on the resolution of the mesh, really, how dense the mesh is. So sometimes it looks a little low res, and that's one of the downsides of using it. Now here I'm just trying to set up the camera, figure out where the lights should be. I go with like a basic 3-point lighting setup. Some of them warm, some of them cool, with that curved backdrop, just trying to figure out some colors. So here I go to render it, and I realize something was wrong with the eyes because they aren't showing up. So I end up reverting to an old save for the eyes, kind of like making a new file and pulling them back in. And I think I end up actually redoing the eyes at a certain point. And here it ends up working out. And so yeah, this is the final render. I hope this is something that you enjoy watching. I'll have a few sculpting videos coming out later. Thanks again for watching and have a good one.